In 1998, Les Papadopoulos was at his Northcote home when he says Nik Radev and two other men bound and gagged his parents, wife and 5-year-old daughter, then ransacked the house.
He went up to her, he stuck the gun on the temple, and he banned it. He goes, the money or your daughter.
Radev learnt the power of violence as a child. He was born into Soviet-controlled Bulgaria in 1959.
Nik Radev had been jailed for a number of violent crimes, violent assaults. We believe there's a there as well, and he had been involved in armed robberies and extortion. Nik Radev arrived in Australia as a political refugee, but he's not the Dalai Lama. He was a violent criminal in Bulgaria, and by some means, he was able to clean his record.
It's believed that Radev's criminal history was withheld from Australian authorities through corrupt influence from the Russian mafia. On a refugee visa, Radev's future in Australia was limited, so he needed a wife. He seduced a 16-year-old hairdresser named Sylvia and persuaded her to marry him. Instead of showing her gratitude, Radev violently abused her.
He subjected her to years of torture and abuse. She was terrified that if she left him, she would be murdered, and other people around her would be murdered. So she was in a terrifying ordeal for years, while he continued his crime spree.
Radev racked up convictions for assault and drug trafficking, which landed him in jail. After Bulgarian prisons, it must have seemed like a holiday resort, just a place to expand his network and learn of the opportunities that awaited him upon his release. He emerged with a cold-hearted plan. From that moment on, if police questioned him, Radev would say his name was Ivan Solokov.
Radev would appear in court. The record would develop against Solokov's name, not his own, and keeping Radev's criminal convictions, criminal past, criminal history essentially clean. And it is believed that Radev basically killed him to steal his identity.
It would be several years before the police unravelled his deception. Radev's time in a Bulgarian prison had made him hardened to violence. It also taught him how to prey on the vulnerable, which he did during a stretch in a Victorian prison in 1998. Turkish-born Sedat Salan was a businessman and fraudster, and it was his first time inside.
Sedat Salan would be about 50 kilograms wringing wet. Nik met Sedat Salan, who was an inferior, weak person in jail, and offered him protection. But in reply for that protection, Sedat had to arrange money to be paid to Nik Radev and his cohorts. Once he left prison, Sedat thought that would all be over, that he's out, he's had his protection, but it didn't stop.
If Nik Radev picked a target, and his targets would normally be weaker than him, he would terrorise them, he would threaten them with death, put guns in their mouths, and he would bleed them dry.
On one occasion, Radev invited his old mate Salan to discuss business at the Stamford Plaza Hotel.
From the moment he entered the room, he was punched, kicked, and held against his will for up to 8 hours. A figure of $120,000 was put to him in relation to a blackmail, and he was held there until he promised that he could actually provide that money. And that's what led to him fleeing the country and hiding in Turkey to protect his own safety, because he was of the belief that he was going back to prison and he wouldn't be able to be protected in there by the police.
As a cop, Ben Archbold's job was to pursue Radev, but he would be the one needing protection. Like Sedat Salan, Archbold would soon experience the consequences of dealing with Nikolai Radev.
So after the members of the Special Operations Group arrested him, he was brought back to St Kilda Road Police Station. He was hooded at the time. His hood was removed, and this is what I encountered. This is Nik Radev.
And Nikolai Radev.
Do it. Eat dogs. We dog!
What we're doing at the moment, Nick, is we're trying to conduct a party call.
Come on! Eat me! Come on! Come on!
Sit down, please, Nick.
You dog!
Sit down in your chair, please.
You f*** your whole life. Yeah, come on, do it!
Nick,
Do it!
sit down.
The pivotal moment in the interview came when Archbold revealed the findings of his investigation.
Nik Radev, when he was arrested for very big offences, and he was using the name Ivan Solikov. Prior convictions were not actually being attributed to his criminal antecedents. So he was able to remain in Australia, commit crimes, get arrested, get charged, get convicted at court, but accrue no criminal records under his own identity, and that was Nikolai Radev.
Despite the incriminating evidence, Radev was released. Fearing deportation, he went on the warpath.
Radev has gone completely berserk. The hatred for this policeman that interviewed him, and whom he had tried to humiliate in the interview room, he became obsessed with revenge.
Radev then decided to take matters into his own hands and try and scare him off by threatening to kill him. He put the feelers out to find out where Ben Archbold lived.
We believe a corrupt member of the Victorian Police Force sold Ben Archbold's home address for $30,000 in a strip club to Nik Radev. Things escalated even further when Radev appeared at Archbold's parents' hotel.
And the suggestion is, from a listening device, that he was in possession of a hand grenade at the time. He asked my father whether I was there.
No, he wasn't aggressive to me. He was just probably arrogant. You know, just take him as another punter who's having trouble getting on or whatever. And in the middle of the conversation, he just said, "Oh, you're not Ben's dad, are you?" And I said, "No, Ben who?"
So, coming to the family hotel there with a hand grenade, it's a fairly unambiguous statement. I might take everyone out here. Doesn't matter, but I'll get Ben Archbold. So, you know, Ben had to go into hiding. His family sold the hotel. They had to move away. It really shattered their lives forever. And I think there's a trail of families that Nik Radev touched in similar ways.
I don't think Radev was ever charged with anything in relation to the threats to kill. Radev, as a result of that, went on for a further 3 or 4 years because of his reputation. Everybody knew about it, and it made him bigger in the eyes of the scumbags that he was running around with.
Radev continued with his tried and tested extortion techniques.
His area of expertise would be that he would set up a drug deal and assume or let that person believe that he had drugs to sell. The person would rock up with a whole heap of money. He would then just extort the money from him, take the money. There was never any drugs. He would just take the money, do the rip and get rid of him. I mean, as if that person is going to go to the police and report the fact they were there trying to buy $500,000 worth of drugs. It just doesn't happen.
Like Deborah, Radev thought it would be a good idea to go into business with Carl Williams.
Carl by now was well established in the manufacture of amphetamines, had good connections. He was a very good businessman in this area, if you like. People trusted him, and therefore he was doing business with a range of people. Radev was a quarrelsome, difficult person to deal with in this business, but he was taking lots of product. So Carl, in his, I guess, greed and naivety, kept doing business with him.
Carl Williams and Nik Radev had a relationship, but it was a very awkward one. Williams was fearful of Radev.
By 2003, Radev was at the centre of drug operations in Melbourne and business was booming. The demand for amphetamines and ecstasy had created a latter-day gold rush. Carl Williams still controlled the amphetamine trade, courtesy of his connections for precursor chemicals, and a gifted speed cook who produced excellent product.
As Williams' empire expanded, Radev endeavoured to expand his own empire, but he just did not have the ability, because violence, although it might have been the short-term answer, it was not the long-term solution in relation to his network building, and he just didn't have the ability. He could stand over and he would kill people, but he just couldn't kill enough people to be able to take over the Williams empire.
There was an increasing level of tension in their relationship. Radev was continually complaining about the quality of speed that was coming out of Carl. He wanted to meet the cook to have this out and discuss the recipe. And he wouldn't have known, two things about how to make a batch of speed, but this was the underlying plan, that he planned to rip everything off. Radev's plan was always to find out who the speed cook was, where he was, and come and kidnap him and make him work only for Nik Radev. And of course, this wouldn't have made other people very happy, given how good George was at what he did and so forth. So this was really the beginning of the end for Nik Radev.
Nik Radev had a long and violent criminal past. He lived by the sword, and last night he died by the sword. As he approached his black Mercedes in Queen Street, Coburg, a gunman fired at least 7 shots, one hitting Radev in the head. He died instantly. 2 friends ran off, one escaping in a taxi.
It's believed that Carl Williams ordered the hit and that Benji Venyamin had reprised his role as executioner to Aus Radev, just as he had his old friend Dino. Benji and Williams eventually met their own violent ends. As they say in the Melbourne underworld, we catch and kill our own.